Almost 30 years since democracy dawned here in South Africa, plenty of promises of equality and freedom were made back then. Some have been successful, some would also suggest a lot of it has not. Women still discriminated against and disenfranchised, imprisoned by fear of their male counterparts. Is that still the view held these days? Well, let's discuss what was Women's Day yesterday and of course still Women's Month and how it should be celebrated, if at all, with Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, of course the Executive Director of UN Women and South Africa's first and only female Deputy President, making time for us this morning. And good morning to you, and appreciate the time. You said I should call you Phumzile, so I'm going to do that because you have so many titles. Phumzile, good morning to you. I know we're speaking a day after National Women's Day, but how would you have reflected on a day like yesterday? Much to celebrate, or is there still too much work to be done? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Yes, we definitely have something to celebrate because women have worked very hard to make some breakthroughs, and I don't think that we should not celebrate those. But of course, we have a lot of work to do. You have highlighted gender-based violence as one of our major problems. Indeed, it is one of those crimes that preoccupy us. So while we celebrate, we have to be focused on finding solutions to the crimes that still dominate in our society.
With your work as the Executive Director of UN Women, obviously you would have had a lot of international experience as well. How do you try and translate all those years of experience into a practical conversation for women here in South Africa?
You know, unfortunately, there isn't a country that is free of violence against women. That is the sad reality. However, there are countries that are doing much better in fighting gender-based violence. And one of the important interventions that we need is a functioning law enforcement. That is very important. Even though you bring in law enforcement when the crime has already happened, what we obviously want in the first place is to prevent these crimes. And in that case, you need to mobilize society to be against these crimes and to take actions in their community to prevent them. So on one hand, you need law enforcement in order to make sure that when a crime has happened, they take effective action. But in the first instance, you need to prevent those crimes. You need families to be alive to this situation, and you need the community to be very vocal and very active in preventing these crimes.
Many people will contend as well that the sentences handed down for perpetrators of gender-based violence, Phumzile, are not strong enough. The sentences are not stringent enough, and we should bring back, for example, life imprisonment. There's even been an argument before about the returning of the death penalty when it comes to violence against women. What's your view on the penalties here in our country?
Certainly, I would also like to see harsher penalties, because if you give these light sentence, you give a perpetrator an impression that the law is on the side of the perpetrator. I think a violent rape and the killing of women, and as you can see, femicide is also very common in our country, should attract life sentences in some cases. The fact that you disorganize the dependence of the person that the crime is perpetrated against, the family, we lose breadwinners. These are really serious losses in the community and serious violations of human rights.
Of course, you were the Deputy President of our country at one point as well. I want to get a sense of sitting in the highest offices in our country. As a woman, how difficult was it to have your voice on an issue like this raised in what many still consider to be a bit of a boys' club there at the top of government?
Well, it was a challenge, but also I must say at that time there were also a lot of men that I could work with who were supportive, starting with the president. So I was fortunate in that case that I was able to have some men who could also support me, and strong women as well.
How do you take that forward now as a government? Because yesterday we would have had President Ramaphosa saying all the right things, but everyone I've spoken to so far gives me a sense that there needs to be education for young men in our country. Somewhere along the lines, Phumzile, somewhere along the lines, young men in our country have felt entitled. It is okay. I'm not saying all men. Some men feel they're entitled to treat women like this. Where does this education for men begin so we can try and break this patriarchal society?
Yeah, the education for men has to begin at a young age, because the men become prejudiced as early as when they are 6 years old. Research exposes. So we have to start at foundation level to educate boys about gender equality. But also we have to continue. Even to older men, this is still a subject that we have to broach. I feel that we will end gender-based violence when we have been able to mobilize enough men to take this issue with the seriousness it deserves and take the action that is required in order for us to stop it. I think something that is still missing in society is a men's feminist movement, not for men to join women's movement, to have their own stronger movement, stronger than what we have today, that tackles on these issues on a dedicated, and when I say dedicated, something that they will do and not tolerate any violation of the rights of women. That we don't have yet, and that we have to continue and to encourage, to demand, and to make sure that we have a massive activism amongst men that addresses these issues.
Let me ask you this in closing, Phumzile, I want to get your thoughts. Do you think, and there's an argument for this, that GBV can be dealt with more stringently when one day South Africa has a female president? Do you think that if a female president was in power, we could fix this?
I think so. I think there's a greater chance to deal with this issue when you have a female president who is also supported, obviously, by both men and women. And since we have never had a woman president, we'll never know. But certainly,
could it be you?
Has crossed my mind.
Would you put your hand up again?
I don't know. Any woman that would get into this, I think, will do a really sterling job. It doesn't have to be me.
But you'd like to see a female president? Like to see a female president? Phumzile
Absolutely.
Mlambo-Ngcuka,
Absolutely.
of course. Former deputy president of the country saying we'd like to see a female president here in South Africa, as or making time for me this morning. Also, a former executive director at UN Women, and of course our first and only female deputy president, former, making time for us on ENCA this morning.